Chapter 5, Part B of Greener Than You Think. This is a LibriVox recording. All LibriVox recordings are in the public domain. For more information or to volunteer, please visit LibriVox.org. Greener Than You Think by Ward Moore. Chapter 5, Part B. Mr. Albert Weiner, Queen Elizabeth Hotel, Perth, Western Australia, AC. Dear Sir, according to your instructions, our party left Paramaribo on the 9th instant for Medellin, giving out that we were going to see possible tin deposits near there. At Medellin, I checked with our men and was told that work gangs with the stuff needed to make landing fields, together with caches of gas and oil, enough for 3 times the flying required, had been dropped both at Mount Whitney and on Banks Island. A.W., I tell you, the boys down there are on their toes. Of course, I did not tell them this, but gave them a real old-fashioned pep talk and told them if they really made good, they might be moved up to Rio or Copenhagen or maybe even London. Everything being okay in Medellin, we left on the 12th instant, heading at first south to fool any nosy cops, and then straight west, so as to be out of range of the patrol boats. It was quite late before we could head north, and the navigator was flying by instruments, so it was not until dawn that we saw land. You can sneer all you like at Brother Paul, and of course he has not had the benefits of an education like you, A.W., but I want to tell you that when I looked out of the port and saw nothing but green grass where houses and trees and mountains ought to have been, I remembered that I was a backslider and sinful man. However, this is beside the point. The lady professor, Miss Frances, I mean, and Mr. White and Mr. Black were both so excited they could hardly eat, but kept making funny remarks in some foreign language which I do not understand. However, I do not think there was anything wrong or disloyal to you in their conversation. You would have thought that flying over so much green would have got tiresome after some time, but you would have been wrong. I am sorry I cannot describe it to you, but I can only say again that it made me think of my account with my Maker. While I think of it, although it does not belong here, in Paramaribo I had to fire our local man as he got into trouble with the police there and was giving Consolidated Pemmican a bad name. He said it was on the firm's account, but I told him you did not approve of breaking the law at all. We had no trouble sighting the party at Mount Whitney, and I want to tell you, A.W., it was a great relief to get rid of the scientists, although they are no doubt all right in their own way. Some of the work gang kicked at being left behind, although that was in our agreement. They said they were sick of the snow and the sight of the grass beyond. I said we only had room in the transport for the Banks Island gang, and anyway, they would have company now. I promised them we would pick them up on our next trip. Miss Frances and the 2 others acted like crazy. They kept shaking each other's hands and saying, "We are here! We are here!" although anybody but a nut would have thought saying it was a waste of time, as even a small child could have seen that they were. And anyway, why anybody should want to be there is something beyond me. We took off from Whitney on the 14th instant, flying back southwest. There were no landmarks, but the navigator told me when we were over the side of L.A. I have to report that the grass looked no different in this area where it is the oldest. Then we flew northeast, looking for the Great Salt Lake, according to your instructions. I am sorry to say that we could not find it, although we flew back and forth for some time, searching while the instruments were checked. The lake has disappeared in the grass. We headed northeast by east, finding no landmarks except a few peaks above the snow on the Rocky Mountains. I am very glad to say that the Great Lakes are still there, although much smaller, and Lake Erie and Lake Ontario so shrunk I might have missed them if the pilot had not pointed them out. The St. Lawrence River is, of course, gone. We followed the line of the big Canadian lakes north, but except for depressions, which may be swamps, in the latitudes of the Great Bear and Great Slave Lakes, there is nothing but grass. We stayed overnight at Banks Island, and it was very cold and miserable, but we were happy to remember that there was no grass underneath the snow below us. Next morning, the 16th, after fueling up, we took off with the ground crew for the homeward trip. Stopping at Whitney, everything was okay, except that I did not see the lady professor, Miss Frances, I mean, as Mr. White and Mr. Black said she was too busy. I will be in London to meet you on the 1st, as arranged, and give you any further news you want. Until then, I remain yours truly, A. Preblesham, Vice President in charge of Field Operations, Consolidated Pemmican. I cannot say Preblesham's report was particularly enlightening, but it at least squelched any notion the grass might be dying of itself. I did not expect any great results from the scientists' expedition, but I felt it worth a gamble. In the meantime, I dismissed the lost continent from my mind and turned to more immediate concerns. The disappearance of American foundries and the withdrawal of the Russian products from export after their second revolution have forced a boom in European steel. English, French, and German manufacturers of automobiles, rails, and locomotives, anticipating tremendously enlarged outlets for their output, even if those new markets still fell short of the demand formerly drawing upon the American factories, had earmarked the entire world supply for a long time to come. Since I owned large blocks of stock, not only in the industries, but in the rolling mills as well, this boom was profitable to me. I had long since passed the point where it was necessary, no matter how great my expenses or philanthropies, for me to exert myself further. But, as I have always felt anyone who gains wealth without effort is no better than a parasite, I was contracting for new plants in Bohemia, Poland, northern Italy, and France. I did not neglect buying heavily into the Brahe Basin and into the Swedish ore mines to ensure the further supply of these mills. In spite of the able assistance of Stuart Thario and the excellent spade work of Preblesham, I was so busy at this time, for in addition to everything else, the sale of concentrates diagrammed an ever-ascending spiral, that food and sleep seemed to be only irritating curtailments of the working day. It was the fashion when I was a youth for novelists to sneer at businessmen and proclaim that the conduct of industry was a simple affair, such as any half-wit could attend to with but a portion of his mind. I wish these cynics could have come to know the delicate workings and balances of my intricate empire. We in responsible positions, and myself most of all, were on a constant alert, ready for instant decision or personal attention to a mass of new detail at any moment. On one of the occasions when I had to fly to Copenhagen, it was Winifred and not General Thario who met me at the airport. General T is so upset, she explained in her vivacious way, that I had to come instead, but perhaps I should have sent Pauline. I assured her I was pleased to see her, and hastened to express concern for her father. "Oh, it's not him at all, really," she said. "It's Mamma. She's all bothered about Joe." I lowered my voice respectfully and said I was sure Mrs. Thario was overcome with grief, and perhaps I had better not intrude at such a time. "Pooh!" dissented Winifred. "Mamma doesn't know what grief is. She's simply delighted at Joe's doing a Custer, but she's awfully bothered about his music." "In what way?" I asked. "Do you mean getting it performed?" "Getting it performed, nothing. Getting it suppressed. That a long line of generals and admirals should wind up in a composer is to her a disgrace which will need a great deal of living down. It preys on her mind. Poor old Stuart is home now, reading her choice passages from The Winning of the West by Theodore Roosevelt to soothe her nerves." I had been more than a little apprehensive of meeting Mamma again, but Winifred's report seemed to reassure me that she would be confined, if not to her bed, at least to her own apartments. I was sadly disillusioned to find her ensconced in a comfortable armchair beside a brightly burning fire, the General with a book held open by his thumb. He greeted me with his usual affection. "Albert, I'm sorry I wasn't able to get to the airport." I shook his hand and turned to his wife. "I regret to hear you are indisposed, Mrs. Thario." "Spare me your damned crocodile tears. Where is my son?" "In his last letter, he suggested he would remain in our country as long as it existed. However, it is possible, even probable, he escaped. Let us hope so, Mrs. Thario. That's the sort of damned hogwash you feed to green